स्ट्रांग थी वो, कोई भी एक साथ नहीं कर सकता इतना बहुत, इतनी खुश थी वो ये करने। देखो वो जा रही है, देखो हाँ वो जा रही थी।
मेरा भाई चला गया अभी। मेरा भाई चला गया 5 में से।
मैं मेरी मम्मी के लिए आई हूँ। मेरी मम्मी कल से नहीं मिल रही है। कल से हम लोग मम्मी को ढूंढ रहे हैं, कुछ भी पता नहीं चल रहा है।
1 करोड़ देंगे, 1 करोड़ देंगे, क्या 1 करोड़ देंगे वो? मैं आपको 2 करोड़ दूंगी, मेरे पापा मुझे वापस कीजिए।
Dreams across the country, scores of them have crash landed. A Dreamliner has shattered dreams. A day after that horrific civil aviation disaster, the worst in recent times, we here on the news today will bring you all the latest developments, all the aftermath of that horrific tragedy. Thanks for joining us, the news without the noise. Let's bring you the top developments at this moment. There's been a big breakthrough in the probe into the horrific Air India crash in Ahmedabad. The aviation minister has now officially confirmed that the black box of Air India 171 flight has been recovered from the roof of the crash site. The emergency locator transmitter of the aircraft has also been found. The ALT sends out distress signals to help locate the aircraft in case of an emergency. The official death toll in the tragedy has now risen to 265 people, including 241 on board the plane and 24 on the ground. The local authorities have collected 216 DNA samples. They will help identify the victims. Prime Minister Modi has visited the crash site, also met with the lone survivor of the deadly crash along with other injured. He then met with the family of the former Chief Minister Vijay Rupani, who passed away in that crash. In a bid to prevent a further recurrence of this tragedy, DGCA orders an enhanced safety inspection for Air India's Boeing Dreamliner fleet, given that the aircraft that crashed in Ahmedabad was a Dreamliner. One-time check parameter order will come into force from June 15, will include a series of fuel and engine system checks. Tata Suns chairman N Chandrasekhar refers to the Air India crash as one of Tata's darkest days. In a letter to employees, the Tata Suns chief has termed the tragedy incomprehensible, claiming the entire group is in shock and mourning. But our top story, a day after that horrific air crash tragedy, we focus on the victims. The victims, 265 of them, 241 on board that Air India Dreamliner that crashed in that tragedy from Ahmedabad to London, few minutes after takeoff. 265 innocents, including 241 on board, 24 on the ground, including young doctors who were simply having their food in the canteen when the flight came crashing through their hostel. To all those who were on board and didn't expect this when they were making their journey to London. Their families today are picking up the pieces, struggling to come to terms with the grief and tragedy of what happened to Flight AI 171. I want to start tonight's news broadcast with our correspondents across Ahmedabad who file in the stories, not just from Ahmedabad, from across India and even the UK. Let's listen in to grief and tragedy.
When Air India flight A171 crashed into a residential area just seconds after taking off from Ahmedabad airport, it did not just claim over 250 lives. It destroyed families.
मेरा भाई चला गया पांचों में से
Cruelly ended dreams and left a trail of shock and grief in its wake. Families like that of Dr. Pratik Joshi settled in London. Dr. Joshi was joined by his wife, Dr. Koni Vyas, who had just resigned from a clinic in Udaipur and was set to relocate to the UK along with their 3 young children. Overjoyed at the prospect of a fresh start, they took a family selfie to celebrate a fresh start, but ended up being their last memory together.
कभी डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट में आता ही नहीं था वो। उसने कहा कि डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट है, बच्चे को तकलीफ नहीं पड़ेगी। तो मैं डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट मैंने कहा हाँ आजा बेटा, अच्छा रहेगा बहुत ही। जैसे ही वो उसके सब इमिग्रेशन वगैरह क्लियर हो गया, हमने यहाँ वहाँ से उसे कहा पापा बहुत गर्मी है बाहर, आप चले जाओ घर पे। हम यहाँ आ गए, यहाँ आके फिर उसने वीडियो कॉल किया। फिर उस बच्चे इतने खुश कि पूछो मत।
इतनी खुश थी वो ये करने को।
Another selfie, which turned out to be the final memory, was 22-year-old Kinnal Mistry taking a quick snap with a father who had come to drop her off at the airport. 24 hours later, her father was back wearing the same t-shirt to collect his daughter's remains.
वो इसको ट्रीटमेंट करने का था, इधर तो ट्रीटमेंट करने आई थी 1 महीना के लिए डेंटिस्ट के वहाँ। इतनी खुश थी वो ये करने को।
आप ये कल का ही फोटो है?
कल का ही मैं इधर हूँ। देखो उसने भी स्टेटस भी ऐसा डाला था कि वो मिलेगी नहीं हमको।
He will be forever haunted by his daughter's last Instagram story. Until next time, miss you all. The realization now dawning that there will be no next time.
मुझे पापा वापस लाइए। एयर इंडिया वाले को बोलो 1 करोड़ मैं दूंगी, मेरा पापा मुझे वापस करो।
Those who have grasped this reality, no amount of commiserations or compensation can take away their searing grief.
और ये 1 करोड़ में खरीदोगी मेरे पापा को। आप क्या मजाक बना के लगते हो एयर इंडिया वाले? कुछ सुनते नहीं है एयर इंडिया वाले। 1 करोड़ देंगे, 1 करोड़ देंगे, क्या 1 करोड़ देंगे वो? मैं आपको 2 करोड़ दूंगी, मेरे पापा मुझे वापस कीजिए। मेरी मदर भी वहाँ थी, मुझे तो वापस कीजिए। 2 करोड़ मैं दूंगी आपको।
Khushbu Rajpurohit had married in January this year and was set to join her husband in London for the first time and begin a happily married life. Her father had recovered this video of her entering the airport with the WhatsApp status, Ashirwad Khushbu Beta, going to London. The daughter never reached the intended destination.
मेरा भाई चला गया पांचों में से
Akash wasn't even a passenger. Only 15-year-old, he was working at a chai stall when the plane crashed into his street, killing him instantly and sending his mother to the ICU.
आपके परिवार में और कौन-कौन है?
मैं, मेरा पापा, मेरी बहन, मेरी मम्मी और मेरा भाई चला गया अभी मेरा भाई चला गया पांचों में से कोई नहीं जाने देते मेरे भाई से मिलने के लिए।
आप माँ से मिल पाए?
माँ से नहीं मिल पाए, माँ की तबीयत बरोबर, मेरे भाई से नहीं मिला हुआ अभी
Suresh Bhai is an auto driver who has lost his son on the ground in the crash. His wife, suffering from 50% burns, doesn't even know yet of her son's death.
उनका बेटा वहाँ टिफिन देने गया था। जैसे टिफिन देने गया वैसे ही प्लेन क्रैश हुआ, तो उनकी वाइफ तो पूरा जल गई, 50% जल गई है। बेटा
वहाँ से कूद के पूरा आग में चला गया। तो बेटा तो पूरा डेट हो गया।
Goodbye, India.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
10-hour flight back to England.
It is not just Indians in mourning. A young British couple, Jamie Meek and Fiongal Greenlaw Meek, recorded this Goodbye India video, happy at the prospect of a homecoming that never happened. In this same video is also possible the final video of former Gujarat Chief Minister Vijay Rupani, who was also confirmed dead in the crash. The stories are unending. A newly engaged couple returning from a family celebration in India. A woman and her baby returning from attending a condolence meeting of her father-in-law. For the families of the 241 flyers and many more on the ground who never came home, closure remains a distant hope. We remember them and we mourn them. Bureau Report, India Today.
A nation is in mourning. A nation is grieving. Joining me at this moment is my colleague Preeti Chaudhary, who's been on the ground talking to many of those families who've suffered this unimaginable loss. Preeti, it's been a tough day for you and the other reporters. I salute each and every one of you for being so resilient there on the ground, talking to families. Can't be easy. What's the sense you're getting from having spoken to them? How difficult has it been for each and every one of them to just come to terms with what happened yesterday?
You know, Rajdeep, when you talk about closure, there is no closure for these families in any case. How can there be closure when you lose a loved one in the fashion that they have lost a loved one? And, you know, those tears are not ever going to dry. But having said that, I wish this on no one, on what some of us have seen over the last a little over 25, 26 hours now. Because through the course, you know, Rajdeep, the crash happened, and what we saw, the physical manifestation of the tragedy, of course, is the crash site. But the mammoth, expansive human tragedy plays out here at, you know, the civil hospital in Ahmedabad. This is where the staging is to collect samples of DNA. And I just want to tell our viewers, Rajdeep, just 265 people have been declared dead, 241 declared dead on board the aircraft itself. And till now, just 8 bodies have been handed over of, you know, what I've been given to understand to the families, because only 8 bodies were in a position that they could be recognized. Beyond that, all bodies are charred beyond recognition. Mostly, you know, sadly, unfortunately, what one is actually looking at is to identify remains. Now, how do you do that? It's a mammoth task for the doctors here. You know, the doctors I have known last night when I came in are still working. It's around the clock. Teams of doctors have been brought in from across the country, primarily to actually help in DNA matching. Since last night, Rajdeep, there's been a steady stream of those who live in Ahmedabad, closer to Ahmedabad, of course, were the first ones to come in. Then, you know, Bharuch, Anand. There are a lot of people from Gujarat who actually reside in the UK. And we've seen a lot of them coming in. This morning, you had Vijay Rupani's wife who came in the same flight, you know, were family members of the 53 UK nationals who were killed in this aircraft crash. But I just want to tell you before I throw it back to the studio, the authorities here have given a 3-day timeline for DNA sample matching. And that's, you know, if it happens in just 3 days, 72 hours, it's a huge task. It's a big ask on them, Rajdeep, because what mostly we are picking up is that the agonizing weight of families, the kith and kin, the bereaved, the grieving, who continue to sit here despite knowing that the wait is going to be more than 72 hours, hoping that they'd be able to give dignity in death, a graceful farewell to a death that has been so public and in, you know, the spotlight and public glare, is that the authorities say it just might not be possible. So this wait, which is right now 72 hours given to Rajdeep, like I said, only 8 bodies handed from 265, so we know the sheer numbers we're talking about for DNA matching, could actually be a very long, agonizing wait. So you know, the closure was never coming, but right now, even that small fig leaf of according dignity to a loved one is a far cry away, and that's the tragedy of it all. I wish it on no one.
That's very unfortunate to hear that it's even so difficult now to even identify the dead. That's the next big challenge. So closure is very far away. As you rightly said, it's going to take a long time for all these families to come to terms with what happened to flight AI 171. Preeti Chaudhary joining me with those details there from the civil hospital in Ahmedabad, where those bodies have been taken. And remember, there are many also still battling grievous injuries, including medical doctors on the ground, young medical doctors who are having their food. Let me from there turn to the story that we are breaking on the AI 171 tragedy, the unfolding tragedy. The black box has been recovered. That should tell us the real cause for that crash. Aviation Minister has told India today that the black box was recovered in 28 hours, recovered from the building rooftop. This is where the tail of the plane was found. The DGCA has ordered an inspection of the Air India Boeing fleet. Air India will conduct additional maintenance of that 787 fleet now. Those are the details that we are getting at this moment. The aviation minister says the black box has been recovered, and now hopefully over the next few weeks we will get greater clarity on what exactly happened to flight Air India 171 Ahmedabad to Gatwick Airport. That, of course, focuses the big questions that I want to raise, and these are questions that are doing the rounds, and we will be getting the expert the world is listening to also in a moment. What happened in the final moments or final seconds before the crash? Did the aircraft suffer a technical malfunction as is being suggested mid-air? Was it human error, or could it have been bird strikes a contributory factor? Is it too early to speculate as to what happened to flight AI 171? We'll try and get clues to this. Joining us now first are experts. Captain Mohan Ranganathan is a leading aviation safety expert, someone I've known for years. Sean Prorinci is a former pilot. He joins us as well. And Marco Chan is senior lecturer, aviation operations at Buckinghamshire New University. Thank you all very much for joining us. I want to come to you, Captain Ranganath, first. What's your sense? You've seen those visuals, and aviation experts are dissecting them with different theories. According to you, as of now, what is it, without speculating, that we can confirm?
See, what I can make out from the video, one, I want to emphasize, these are the CCTV footage, which are low resolution cameras and taken from a distance. So trying to zoom in and trying to isolate parts of aircraft which are blurred, we cannot conclude with definite proof that, the speculation about the flaps being retracted or, the other part. But what I can see from the angle of the liftoff, apart from what I've said earlier, one, it could be bird ingestion, though people say they don't see the birds. But if they are at low level from this distance with a low resolution camera, you cannot make out if there are birds. But you can see that the grass height is quite high. But you see at one point, just after liftoff, the body angle is shallow. It is not the usual liftoff angle, which means it is not developing the thrust that is required. So it could be either a compressor stall, or it could be due to a bird strike or foreign object ingestion into the engine, which has caused that. But one thing which a lot of people don't seem to, the Boeing design, if you look at the old manuals, the design was it flies interim speed. And when they say interim speed, it is what you use with your stab trim. So if the stab trim is used, looking at the way the nose pitches up before it stalls, I feel that they've used the staprum to relieve the pressure in the hand. And if you relax your controls even for a second, the nose will pitch up. And that is why you have the sharp pitch up before the stall. And the angle at which you find the tail on the building, it's a clear indication that it had not flown into the building, it has stalled into the building. So now that they found the DFDR, it'll completely identify and put an end to any speculation. And I'm more interested in the CVR because all the recordings, the area recording, what the two pilots spoke or discussed during that crucial couple of minutes, and the ATC, that is what is important.
Let me stop you for a moment, Captain. I've heard you very clearly, and I think you're being very clear. I want to also go to Sean Przybylski, former pilot. Sean, now that we've had 24 hours to digest those visuals more and more, is there any clarity? Are we any clearer today than we were yesterday as to what could have happened to the flight?
I'm not sure we really have any clarity. I think that we have, when they made the call, the Mayday call, they made the comment about no thrust and no lift. So that implies that they have a double engine failure. And this is absolutely the worst time for that to happen. What I wonder is, especially with the nose, as the gentleman had stated, as the captain has stated, that being lower, if we had one engine that failed, and you would have the nose being lower if that's the case, if you had a single engine that failed first, and then the second engine failed a few moments later, that and you might see something like that with a bird strike. So they were dealing with a single engine failure, and then just a few moments later, the other engine started to wind down. The other thing that I noticed on the takeoff is that there seems to be a lot of what looks like dust or water. I'm not sure what the weather conditions were, if the runway was wet. If so, that would explain all of the debris that you see at liftoff around the aircraft. A wet runway would certainly look like that. If it was not wet, and
it wasn't
if
wet
it
at
was,
all. It was very warm. It was a very, very warm, hot day in Ahmedabad.
Okay, so it hasn't rained in the last 24 hours or so?
No.
If that's not the case, then you see the picture there. Why is all that dust lifting off around the airplane? And that made me wonder about FOD problems, foreign objects debris. I know, and I'm not sure there, but I know here in the States that we do routine drives up and down runways looking for problems on the runways, because you can suck in rocks and so forth and cause engine failures. So I'm just wondering, I've seen, just like the captain here and others, we've all seen thousands of takeoffs, and I've never seen that on a runway that's a clean runway, unless it's water. So I don't quite know. That looks unusual.
Okay, so that's one unusual thing you've detected. Mako Chan, Senior Lecturer, Aviation Operations at Buckinghamshire University. You've also digested those images. What do you see?
Thank you for the question, and excellent to be among the gentlemen here as well. Yeah, I mean, from the video, we see a bit of alcohol dust from the runway, which I wouldn't be surprised in certain region in the world. I've operated out of India myself as well, and on takeoff with runways like these, it's quite common to get dust. But as the captain mentioned as well, the resolution is rather low to determine whether it's going to be debris or dust. But what I've observed, now I'm not going to touch on the flap extension bit, because again, the resolution is too low to verify that. But I do want to touch on the engine bit. Now, it's quite obvious the engine power wasn't sustainable for the climb to be maintained, which is why the loss of thrust made a call later on. And as you can see, it seemed to climb okay in the initial seconds, and then it really struggled. Now, we don't know whether it was a single engine failure or a dual engine failure. If it's a single engine failure, I would say usually within seconds, the aircraft would seem to yaw to the left or to the right, depending on the side of the engine. Imagine one engine being more powerful than the other. But we haven't really seen that being an obvious one. We don't actually see any smoke or any fire coming out of that either from the video. Admittedly, again, low resolution. So bird strike maybe with a lower possibility. However, I would also say the engine damage physically right away could be a lower possibility as well. Like I said, I don't really see any smoke or any fire, but perhaps we can also look into engine failure in terms of computer fault or fuel supply issue. Right. Now, when I say fuel supply issue, because it's internal, we can't see it from our human eyes, but we have had similar scenarios in London Heathrow Airport back in 2008 with the British Airways 777, just on the short final on the landing, where the fuel supply was actually clogged. Now, it was due to ice clogging up, would be a different scenario, but it could still lead to a fuel supply problem with fuel contamination, for example, leading to a loss of engine power. Now, not a complete loss in that case. The engine was still running, right, but not at the desired power, and it actually crash landed onto a runway. Now, there were no fatalities. It was miraculous in that incident, but perhaps another engine failure issue again.
In a sense, therefore, Marco, very quickly, are you also, in a sense, saying Boeing will have much to answer for, given that the Dreamliner has been bandied around by Boeing as their gold standard?
Well, I would say the manufacturers, as well as the airlines, the pilots, regulators, they all hold safety to the highest standard. We can't now all of a sudden say it's Boeing's problem. It's too early to portion blame at this stage. And remember that the point of investigation is to find out the truth for the victim's family, not to portion blame, and for us to learn from the incident to enhance safety. So yes, right now, way too early to say it's Boeing's problem. Yes, the public's image may not be as good as it was because of the 737 MAXs earlier on and the earlier settlement in the United States of legal proceeding with the Ethiopian Airlines. But remember, they are two different aircraft type, and there could be individual causes of accidents. So let's not jump into conclusion and say it is Boeing's problem.
Captain Ranganath, since it's tough to jump to any conclusions, are you reasonably confident that given the fact that the black box has now been unearthed, we will get to know exactly what happened to flight AI 171, or will this remain one of those great mysteries of aviation?
No, I expect that there's going to be some transparency this time, because I'm not commenting based on any bias, but I'm saying that usually NTSB, when they participate, they do not give a counter to the findings of the country. Like in the case of the Mangalore crash, which is completely cooked up the report, NTSB was very passive about it, though there are other factors involved there. But when it was the Silk Air crash, when the report tried to apportion blame on the rudder control of the Boeing, NTSB did intense investigation and identified that it was pilot suicide. So here, the reputation of Boeing is at stake. And I don't think the NTSB will play ball if a blame is apportioned only to the aircraft. They will go for the truth. And the DFTR will definitely show what is wrong with the aircraft, if there is one, and whatever took place at the time of the crash. So I expect the British AAIB being involved, because British citizens were also affected. They were dead.
I'm going to stop you for a moment, Captain. I'm also joined at this moment by a very special guest. His video has gone viral. Captain Steves is someone who has been tracking this for the last 24 hours. His video has now gathered millions of views. He is the one who seemed to suggest that there was something wrong with the wing flap of AI 171 among the various possibilities. Captain Steve, appreciate your joining us. I was going through your video very carefully. Give us a sense to our viewers, as you now have had more time to digest and look at the visuals very carefully. What is this wing flap theory that you believe in some way stopped the flight from getting the necessary thrust, power, and altitude?
Well, what we can observe from the video of the airplane is that, at least for the initial takeoff roll, both engines were producing sufficient thrust to go in flight. You can see that as they take off, the dirt off the side of the runways is dusting up. So they're at full power when they're taking off. They have a normal rotation. What doesn't happen after takeoff is the gear never comes up. And that would happen about 50 to 100 feet. The pilot flying would request the gear to be raised. That never happens. The aircraft shortly after that loses lift. And you could lose lift for a number of reasons. It could be a dual power loss. That's, in my mind, the least likely of the occasions, because we can see that the engines are operating fine as they do the takeoff roll. The other would be that something changed the configuration of the wing so that the flaps were not in a position to create that extra lift. If the airplane loses lift while the gear is down at that slow speed, it's going to do exactly what you saw on the video, which is it's going to begin to waddle and descend, and just you're kind of in a power on descent until it impacts the ground.
But why would that happen? Would that be because of an engine failure, because of a gear failure? What would explain that?
Well, the main issue here is the loss of lift. Now, the loss of lift could be caused by a dual engine failure or a loss of power. That's one theory. I'm saying I think that's less likely because we can see the engines operating, and we don't have any indication from the video at this point that either one of the engines stopped running. We didn't see fire coming out or sparks or smoke, nothing like that to give us an indication. The black boxes will let us know here shortly, probably within the week, if the engines lost power for some reason. What I'm saying is there's two other possibilities. They took off without the flaps set for takeoff, which is completely unlikely, because once you push the power up in an airplane 787 and the flaps are not set for takeoff, a horn goes off that's so deafening you can't hear yourself think. Then lights flash in front of you. It's inconceivable that the pilots would have continued with the takeoff roll under those circumstances. The third possibility, and this is unfortunate, but it's when they rotated and took off, everything was operating normally. It could be that when the pilot flying asked for the gear up, the other pilot mistakenly grabbed the flap handle and raised it instead of the landing gear handle and raised it. That is also a possibility, because we can see that airplane shortly after takeoff, when the gear is supposed to come up, it begins to lose lift and begins to wallow and crash. The only other possibility is that the flaps came up and those wings lost all of their lift.
Mm-hmm. The landing wheels also, right? In that video, we see the landing wheels don't go back into as the flight is taking off. They're still very much there. They haven't. How do you see? Could it be that the pilot who then signaled Mayday simply lost thrust, lost power, was losing altitude? Why would the wheels still be out there?
So what happens right as the nose wheel lifts off and the airplane begins to fly, the pilot flying will set a 2.5 degree up nose attitude, and the main mounts, the back wheels, will come off the ground. Once that happens, the other pilot says positive rate. That means you're flying and you're climbing normally. At that point, the pilot flying will say gear up, and that he commands the other pilot to grab the landing gear handle and raise the gear. Here's where it could have gone wrong. If he didn't grab the handle and raise the gear, but mistakenly grabbed the flap handle and raised it, that would start a chain of events that they couldn't recover from. And as I see the flight path of that airplane, they look completely normal until that place where they should raise the gear. But perhaps, just perhaps, this is a theory, they grabbed the wrong handle and raised the flaps instead. The flaps started coming up. The wings lost lift. Those big landing gear are still out there creating a tremendous amount of drag, and there's not enough power to overcome that. Had they been at a higher altitude and could have dropped the nose and gained some speed, they might have flown out of it, but they're at about 300 feet when all that takes place, and they simply didn't have the altitude.
The fact is there a possibility of an external object contamination? There's talk of a possible bird strike. Is that possible with both engines failing?
Absolutely. There's two possibilities that would cause both engines to fail. One is the fuel contamination theory. Although the machines that they use to put fuel in those tanks are very precise, they're very modern, and they detect any sort of water or contamination. If there's even a drop of water, the machine cuts off fueling to the airplane, so it's highly unlikely. In addition to that, there's no other airplanes at that airport complaining about contaminated fuel, so it's unlikely it was contaminated fuel. The other is it could have been a bird strike, a flock of birds, but I don't see any birds on the videos, and it would have had to be so many birds, small birds, that it would have fought out the engines. But you would see that. You'd see fire or sparks or smoke come out of the back of the engine. You don't see any of that. I don't think they hit a flock of birds.
You don't think they hit a flock of birds. You think it could be therefore something internal. And again, of course, more will be known when the black box comes in. But given the fact that the pilot was flying at 400 feet, Ahmedabad airport is 200 feet above sea level, so let's assume it's 600 feet. You're saying it was simply too low for even for the pilot to do any kind of course correction, given the fact that it had happened at such a low altitude. Am I correct?
That's correct. And so once a wing starts to lose lift for whatever reason, the only alternative the pilot has is to lower the nose and gain airspeed. That will create more lift over the wing. He didn't have the altitude to lose. If he had been at 2,000 feet, he could have lowered the nose, lost 1,000 feet, and flown out of it potentially while raising the gear. For whatever reason, we're going to find out in the days to come why those wings lost lift. And both wings lost lift at the same time because it just basically kind of goes over evenly. We're going to find out when the black box data gets released to us. But my theory is that maybe they raised the flaps instead of raising the gear.
Captain Steve, have you seen anything similar in your long period of tracking aviation? Have you seen something ever happen similar to this?
Well, I think the most similar parallel was the last flight of the Concorde. We've seen the video of the Concorde. Now, we know for sure that that was a power loss scenario that created the lack of lift in the wings. They were on fire. They had hit something on the runway. It created a fire. They lost power in their engines on the left-hand side of the airplane, and then they simply couldn't get enough speed to get enough lift over those wings. That we know is a power loss. This could have been a power loss. In my opinion, it probably wasn't. I think it was something else that created the loss of lift on those wings. And I'm as eager as everybody else to find out whether it was the flaps got lifted prematurely or whether it was some other thing that potentially could have caused those engines both to simultaneously stop working.
The reason I ask you that, Captain Steve, is the fact is Boeing has positioned the Dreamliner as a next generation aircraft with a very good flight safety record. This was an 11-year-old aircraft with a pilot who had done more than 8,000 hours. Do you believe, therefore, that those elements should not be considered at the moment?
Well, they should look at everything. And then one of the things that's wonderful about the aviation community is that they will look at everything. They'll inspect all of the airplanes. Every 787 on the planet is going to get looked at now real hard. And that's important. And so that ought to reassure the public that we take this stuff very seriously. Boeing takes it very seriously. All the airlines do. They will do the necessary inspections to rule out things that it isn't and maybe find out what caused this. Again, the information on the black boxes is going to be invaluable to the entire process. It will help them zoom in or narrow in on what was the potential cause. What I'm saying is it's one of three things. Either they lost both engines all at once and in a real big hurry, or they lost lift over the wings due to a misconfiguration of the flaps. Either the flaps got raised prematurely after takeoff, or they were never set properly for takeoff. The first two are very unlikely. My theory, I think, it's sad, but time will tell whether I'm right or not.
Could the pilots have done anything different at all? Do you believe anything different could have been done given the fact that the flight was just as 400, 600 feet taking off? Could he have really done anything different? Because he was barely a few seconds after takeoff when this happens.
Well, the only thing I know for sure that they could have done differently is raise the landing gear. The landing gear is a tremendous amount of drag once you get airborne, and it needs to get raised quickly. So, all of us have flown in the back of a large airliner, and shortly after you take off, you hear the gear come up, and then the airplane pitches up real steep. Sometimes you think you're in a rocket, and you go, "Wow, I can't believe we're climbing so steeply." That's because of the increase in lift due to the reduction in drag from that gear coming up into the airplane. The gear stayed down all the time on this one. That's the only thing we know for sure, because we can see the landing gear never moves. It stays there the entire time. Reducing that drag would have made a difference. Would it made enough of a difference to save that flight? I can't say.
Could there have been a heat factor at all? It was a very warm day. Could the weight of the flight have made any difference at all?
Well, that's a factor. High, hot, and heavy is the things that the pilots look for. It's not a particularly high altitude airport, but it was hot that day. The airplane was heavy, but it wasn't at its max gross weight. But I'm here to tell you, those Boeing 787s, they can climb, and they can climb rather aggressively on a single engine at every max weight. So they could have been completely at the end of their gross weight limits and still flown out of that on a single engine. Now, if both engines go, no, there's no airplane on the planet that's going to fly out of that.
Are we therefore saying that if you were to in some way advise the aviation community here, because there's been a lot of speculation in this country over what could have been gone wrong, and even fear that, how could a wide-bodied aircraft, Dreamliner, crash in this manner? What would you tell them? Where do you start in this investigation now?
Well, I've flown Boeing products my entire 40-year career, and I love them. And I think Boeing puts out a terrific product. Remember, this is the first accident of a 787, and it's just too early to say whether it was something wrong with the aircraft itself. There's lots of extenuating circumstances here. They're going to find out in a few days. But if I was a passenger and I wasn't a pilot, should I be afraid of flying on a Boeing or a 787? No. It's been a very reliable platform. There's too many variables in this to come to a conclusion definitively at this point. I'm thinking in the next week, though, we're going to have a real solid idea of exactly why that airplane stopped flying, why they lost lift over those wings.
Well, one of the guests I had on the show earlier today spoke about dust on the runway. There's also been talk, one of our senior captains here spoke about the grass around the runway being higher than he thought it should be. That, of course, leading to the possibility of a bird strike, but the visuals certainly don't show that. As you say, you're looking also at the possibility of widen the flaps open in the manner that they should have at the time that they should have, the landing gear as well. Among all these theories that are doing the rounds, in your sense, do you want to give a proportion as to which is the most likely at this stage, or is it too premature to even go down that way?
Well, a little bit of dirt or a little bit of grass is not going to cause those engines to fail. And they would have to fail immediately and completely. They would have had to been a catastrophic failure in both engines simultaneously, because those jet turbine engines produce a lot of power. And as you can see, the dirt off the side of the runway, it's being turned up by the engine. So they were at full power when they took off. With that being said, they would have had to fail so immediately and so completely that there would be some evidence, either a fire coming out the back or something. We don't see any of that. And so I don't think it's any of those smaller causes. Those engines would have continued to produce power, maybe reduced power, but they could have kind of limped up into the air. What hurt them was they kept the landing gear down. That's a lot of drag. Had they raised the gear and the engine's been at maybe half power, they still could have kind of flown out of it. I don't think it was a power loss. I think they changed the configuration of the wing and they lost lift.
Listening to you, and I was listening to your video also, which has gone viral earlier today, the sense I got is the strong possibility of pilot error. I know that's something that at this stage, again, one can't have conclusive proof of, but is that a real possibility according to you?
Well, you can't rule anything out, and that's what the investigators will look at. They'll look at all the evidence that they can get from the black box. I think the first place they'll go is where were the flaps set for takeoff? The next thing they'll look at is what was the power setting for takeoff, and were they at the proper power setting, and did they lose power right after takeoff? All that stuff is data that's recorded. They'll know that almost instantaneously. Then after they rule out certain things, then they'll go and look at the secondary issues. Pilot error could be one of those. Again, it's too early to say. I'm not pointing a finger at any of the pilots. I'm just saying that's one of many possibilities for why this airplane lost lift and stopped flying.
In conclusion, how soon do you believe an inquiry like this should reach a conclusion? There's been a worry in the past that many of these inquiries have dragged on, given the fact that the black box has been recovered. Do you believe it's going to be much easier, and there is a definite timeline within which one can go beyond the speculation to get hard information on this flight?
Yeah. Well, I think they're going to know fairly quickly what they think the problem was. The issue with this is they have to be very careful and make sure that they're thorough on this, because what you don't want to do is come out with a quick answer and then turn around a few days later and go, we have to make a correction. That was wrong. That would be brutal to the families and the people that have lost loved ones. You want to make sure you get it right the first time. So I'm all about slow down. Let's just take a look at all the information. Let's rule out certain things, and then let's get together and everybody agree on what they think was the actual cause before you publish anything to the public. Make sure you get it right the first time. We're not in a big hurry. We want to know, but it's not going to bring anybody back. And so we want to get the right answer to this. And if it takes a few days to get that, then I'm fine with that waiting process.
Captain, isn't that the problem of the times in which we live in? In the times we live in, everyone wants instant answers to what could be a very complex issue, or could be very simple, but everyone seems to want answers within 24 hours of this horrific crash, given the magnitude of it. And that's why perhaps everyone's even looking to you on YouTube to find out what is Captain Steve saying. Does that put extra pressure on you to get it right?
Well, that's well said. People do want instantaneous answers, but again, you've got to be thorough with these things, and there are people involved in this, and make sure you get it right for their sake. And yeah, people do turn to me for answers. I'm trying to be very measured about this and say, look, this is my opinion. It's one theory of many. What we do know for sure is this: the gear never came up and the wings lost lift. Now, how they lost lift and why the gear didn't come up, those are mysteries that will get solved, I'm sure, when they are ready to report what they have found on the black boxes.
Okay, Captain Steve, you've given us a sense of why you've sort of gathered so many eyeballs, because whatever you've said is being monitored very closely, even in this country. I appreciate you joining us and taking the time off to give us a detailed explanation of the various possible theories as to why AI-171 crashed in the manner it did. My other guests are still with us, and I want to get each of them to react to what you've just heard. Captain Ranganath, why don't you start off first? Why you've just heard Captain Steve talk about the wing flap theory in particular, possibly alluding to pilot error. Do you believe that's premature at this stage, or is it one of the real possibilities?
It's premature because, as I said, the video is very low resolution, and you can't make out if the flaps were retracted or not. And as even Steve said, if the flaps were not set for takeoff setting, you will have the takeoff warning horn, which is very loud. So the question of taking off without the flaps is out of question. And for me, the dust really, because the engines are very powerful. Okay, this is after the liftoff, but prior to that, the dust could have been sucked in and FOD. One of the things I said. As for the birds flying at a very low altitude, you cannot make out in this video because they'll be very close to the ground picking up the world.
I take your point. Very quickly, 30 seconds, Sean, your sense? Are these all theories that Captain Steve has elaborated all very much on the table, including pilot error?
Absolutely. I agree with Steve. I think he laid it out very well. My comment about the dust was just answering what do I see on the video. That's all about, about potential for
Right.
rocks and other things. Look, this is what I think is really important that we need to think about from a human performance standpoint, which is definitely my specialty, is that in regard to flaps and gear, confusion, and so forth, is we have to remember, first of all, this happened at basically pretty much the worst time that you could have a really serious crisis in the airplane, a double engine failure or something else. That if they become extremely task loaded with dealing with something else, trying to figure out what is going on, be a double engine, loss of thrust, as they said to ATC, other things may get missed or confused. As Steve said, the flaps being pulled up instead of the gear. We've seen this countless times with accidents. I think that's a very likely possibility, but we don't know. It's a speculation, and it's one of the things, as Steve said as well. But from a human performance investigator like myself, is the CVR is going to be really important to help us understand, were they all of a sudden dealing with a huge crisis in the cockpit and other things got confused? It's already a very busy time. That's something that they're going to look at. CVR is going to help us as well, the flight data recorder.
I'm going to leave it there. Marco, we've run out of time, but I appreciate that all of you took the time off to join me on the show tonight, on this very special broadcast. I want to turn, as we close the show, back to the human element. Remember, among the 265 lives lost are 10 crew members and 2 pilots. They come from different parts of the country, from Manipur to Panvel, from Manipur to Maharashtra in a way, and they were all, many of them very young, many of them dreaming to be part of the Dreamliner story, to be part of the Air India story. Their dreams crashed sadly in Ahmedabad yesterday. Many of the families are now grieving in silence, left wishing for one last goodbye that never came. Thanks for watching. Take a look at the story. Good night, goodbye, thoughts and prayers with all the families who are grieving tonight. Namaskar. Om Shanti.
Captain Sumit Sabharwal had promised his old father that he will call upon landing in London. As fate would have it, the last words of the pilot of Air India Flight 171 was not to his family in Powai, but to air traffic control, a desperate mayday call before all communication went silent. With 8,200 flying hours under his belt, Captain Sabharwal was in command of AI-171, supported by co-pilot Clive Kundar, a first officer with 1,100 hours of flying experience. Both men perished in Thursday's crash. Actor Vikrant Messi, a family friend of Clive Kundar, posted a heartfelt message mourning the loss, calling it a personal tragedy. Among the 10 cabin crew on board was Roshni Songhare, just 27 years of age, from Dombivli. A popular travel influencer, Roshni had turned her passion for aviation into a dream career, a dream tragically cut short. Deepak Pathak, a resident of Badlapur and a loyal Air India employee for the past 11 years, also did not return home. His last message to the family was a simple good morning. Since then, his phone has remained unreachable.
बहुत ज़्यादा करके वो बच्चा था, वो सबसे मन में जो मिलता है वो सब बच्चे से लेके बड़े सबको रिस्पेक्ट से बात करता था, सबसे अच्छा हंसमुख के रहता था और बहुत मन में छुपा था।
दीपक और मैं अच्छे दोस्त थे, लेकिन उसका जो नेचर है एकदम अच्छे दोस्ती, सबके साथ दोस्ती बना के रखना, सबको आवाज देना और अपना ड्यूटी अच्छे से निभाना, वही हिसाब से वो चलता था।
The crash in Ahmedabad reverberated almost 3,000 kilometers away in Manipur,
where warring cookies and mateys have been united in grief at losing two of their own, Singson Lamnantham from the Kuki Zo community and 21-year-old Kongbrai Latpam Nantoi Sharma, a matey.
कुछ न कुछ तो वो लोग सरकार की तरफ से कुछ न कुछ तो बोलना चाहिए, कुछ न कुछ तो घर के परिवारों का देखभाल करना चाहिए, यही तरीका है। और कोई क्या, गुजर गया तो गुजर गया है, चला गया तो चला गया। मेरी तो सिर्फ 3 बेटियां हैं, पहली काम मिला है बोले मेरी बेटी, इसके बाद क्या बोलूं, कुछ बोलने की कोई।
Every crew member on AI-171 was serving with pride. They were young and had dreams of taking flight, quite literally. And now, each story is a heartbreaking reminder of the human cost of this crash. Bureau Report, India Today.